Newsroom. Today we're going to tell you a tale of globalization. The good news about the world being a smaller place is that you can study abroad. In fact, if you're a standout student, graduate schools and potential employers will love you, and they'll try to entice you. The problem on this old continent of ours is how the rest of the population feels about foreigners. We can show you the scene outside the Sorbonne University in October, where students were demonstrating, fuming at an Interior Ministry directive that effectively tells foreign students to pick up their diplomas and go. The poster child of this predicament, French-speaking Canadian doctoral student Émilie Vézina. She was busily researching migratory trends for African HIV patients seeking treatment in France and Canada when she was told that since she had no firm graduation date, she had 30 days to leave the country. That directive comes as France prepares itself for a presidential election where the xenophobic National Front's polling at 16%. And it's not just France, by the way. The UK has also tightened visa rules. How this tug of war over immigration is going to play out, not just in the short term, but over the long run. After all, this is a nation where the population's aging fast. That is the topic. Today in the France 24 debate, France's closed-door policy. And with us to talk about it, Johanna Busby, American student at France's prestigious Sciences Po Political Science Institute. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Also with us, Jonathan Chaloff of the International Migration Division at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And another American in Paris, one who's a little bit been here a little bit longer than Joanna, Craig Capita, senior writer at Bloomberg News, and Charles Jivaninovich of the conservative UMP party. Thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate, which you can follow on Facebook. A lot of you have been weighing in on this conversation. And also on Twitter, where our handle is @FrancoisF24. Now, that outcry over a directive that came out May 31st has already got the government in damage control mode over this one. 202 of the 530 cases filed by the Association of Grande École graduate schools have been settled. The directive, though, still stands. It says the priority in that directive should be given to those are in French, those who already reside regularly inside of France. Now, Joanna, just tell us briefly your story. You're directly affected by all of this. You're a member of that May 31st
I am.
group. You're directly affected by it because, in effect, you were forced to sign on for another year of studies rather than take the job you had been offered.
So I was offered a job, and because I couldn't actually even apply, the Préfecture now is not allowing certain students to actually even apply for a change in their visa status. So that forces you to re-enroll in school or lose your right to actually live in France. And if you re-enroll, you then can become an intern at the job that you were supposed to work in, or elsewhere if you're lucky, and that's what you do.
Did this catch you off guard?
It completely caught me off guard because there was a process that was in place, that's been in place for a long time. You know, the president had, when campaigning for election the first time around, had spoken of choosing certain immigrants and trying to favor the entry into France of immigrants who are from a fairly educated background. Coming from that background myself, I really did not think that it would be a problem to come, to stay, and to have a first, like a practical training type first work experience in France.
And you say that some of your fellow classmates have gone home as a result.
Yeah, some have gone home just because they haven't been able to find a job. People are even having trouble finding internships now because people don't want to take on interns that are foreign because they know that they won't be able to necessarily hire them after. So the repercussions are just massive. And then other people are, you know, in these weird situations where they're telecommuting to a job that's in France from the United States because they're American. So they're flying into France every couple of weeks. But obviously, France loses the tax revenue. The person is completely like off the books in France and is legally in New York, but clearly that's not happening. Or in London. I have a friend doing that in London. Different people all over the place, and it really doesn't make that much sense.
All right, we're talking about skilled labor here. I know, Charles Jivaninovich, that you don't personally support this measure, and that there's heated discussion within the ruling UMP Conservative Party over it.
Well, we have actually discussion in our party. I'm part of the most progressive part of the party, and we have also many young national secretaries of our political parties which are against this directive, which gives awkward situation as yours, as many of my fellow friends.
How do you think it came about that they're targeting, in this case, potentially very skilled labor?
Yeah, no, but this directive is just recalling a preceding law. So it's just something which describes what the law has to say. I think that Claude Guéant's viewpoint...
The Interior Minister.
Yes, the Interior Minister, is just to say that for the immigration, we have to have both a qualitative and a selective approach. And I think personally that we need to encourage international students in France. Sciences Po, which is our school, has now 40% of the student body with international students, and we need French company today need international students and international interns. For as an example, engineers, we need 10,000 engineers in France today. So we'll need to take this force from abroad.
And you say that it's recalling a law that was already on the books, but they have raised, for instance, the stipend that foreign students must prove their parents can pay to stay in France. And it's quite hefty. It's like 7,000 euros.
Well, it's exactly 650 euros per month to be a student in France. I just wanted to recall one thing, that France is still today the third country welcoming international and foreign students with 12% of its student body. So we have a true tradition of welcoming international students in France, and I think we have to keep this tradition.
Right. By the way, it's not just France where this is arising. The UK's coalition government has scrapped visas for foreign graduates, enough to scare away applicants for graduate schools. The head of the Manchester Business School recently telling the Financial Times that foreign MBA enrollment was down 18% at his institution. Postgraduate taught enrollment, what they call PGT, down 3%. He says that's not surprising. Those students, MBA students, are more likely to seek professional placements in the UK. So the removal of the post-study work visas makes it harder for non-EU graduates to stay, which reduces the attractiveness of the UK as a place to study. It's not just France.
No, absolutely not. And I think it's important to look at what's happening in a number of different countries. If you look across the OECD, what you see is more and more interest in actually initiatives that are aimed at keeping and retaining graduating students, graduating international students. So I think one reason why the reaction to these measures has been so visible is because it goes against a bit the trend of finding ways for these students to stay. So why are so many countries interested in keeping international students? Well, as Charles said, the first reason is that there is an increasing competition for high-skilled workers. There's a smaller number of young people coming into the labor market, and the kinds of skills that are produced in universities are more and more in demand. The second point is that in a number of countries, including the UK and other English-speaking countries, international students are actually a source of income for universities. They're a major player. It's one of the main. It's a major export industry.
How do you then explain these directives, both in France and in the UK? What's going on?
I think that there's several different factors at work. Both countries do have ways for international students to stay. Most countries in the OECD have a job search visa for graduating students. France also has one. It's true that the requirements for application are apparently not that well known. You have to apply a number of months before you actually finish, and that gives you 6 months to look for a job, and that's more or less in the average in the OECD, 3 to 12 months to look for a job. Some countries do insist that the job that you find match your education. So Germany, France both require this. Other countries don't, but they might impose a salary requirement so that international students can't stay just to work in a restaurant, for example, which is, I think, one of the concerns. Although, if you look at these students, these are people who have master's degrees. These are people who speak the language of the country that they've studied in, and they're absolutely people who most countries want to keep.
Craig Capitas, how do you explain what's going on here?
Sarkozy's pandering to the xenophonic fish heads of the National Front. End of story. This is ridiculous, what's going on here, and it also belies the larger problem with Sarkozy's administration, something that you've discussed here since from the moment he was elected. that this administration promised when they first ran for office that they were going to attempt to better integrate French society, have some sort of civil rights movement a la United States, if you will, that the minorities, the kids in the banlieues, that immigrants were going to be better inculcated and integrated into society and the educational system. This was a cornerstone of his policy, and I know your group has for years been saying, hey, Sarko, how come you haven't been doing this? And this is just the outcome of it. This is the first step. To go after students is the height of absurdity. This is knee-jerk, vitriolic, right-wing politics at its absolute worst.
It's interesting to listen to the French president. He's been several times, by the way, to China and India to try and woo foreign investors, promote trade, and he's spoken to students there. He's promised to double, for instance, the number of Chinese students in France. And when he visited New York's Columbia University in the spring of last year, there he made quite a strong pitch.
I want American students to come and study in our universities, and for French students to do the same in yours. In the 21st century, what's the point of a world where we can travel freely if you can't come and study in France, and if we have difficulties to send our students to the US? This is what we're changing now in France.
Do you expect, Charles Junovich, for there to be some kind of a public statement in the days to come from the Interior Minister going back on this directive formally?
I don't think so. Actually, I think he has been given to the prefectures, many corrective instructions, and that many files are going to be handled, and that.
But on a case-by-case basis.
On a case-by-case basis, yes, exactly.
The problem with that is that that isn't retroactive.
It
Which
isn't.
means that if you walk into the prefecture now and you were someone who would have graduated at the end of the 2011 school year, your student visa is coming to expiration, if it hasn't already, now. Which means that your time is effectively up. And so it's really nice to say now at this point in time, when everyone's essentially getting ready to pick up and go home anyway, that on a case-by-case basis, if you have the money to sit and wait, keep paying rent, keep paying your light bill, keep paying your taxes.
It is a true problem, yes.
That is not really going to help people. And the damage control the damage that's happening now. I mean, I'm getting Facebook messages and emails from friends in the U.S. saying, thought I was going to come study in France. Should I take out a loan to come study here?
The damage is huge for our country, because if you look at Spanish papers, Brazilian papers, Chinese newspapers, they all talk about this issue.
Of course.
And I think it's bad for our
and
image.
who's easier to track? In a political year, you want to ramp up your metrics and your statistics. This year, we interdicted X number of illegal whatevers in our country. It's much easier to statistically and bureaucratically track down and ramp up statistics with a student here than it is with people coming into the country on boats, illegal immigrants, and running up north. It looks like there's some kind of police action here. And once again, when it comes to this issue of integration within France, I think Sarkozy has once again fallen flat on his face. Now, I don't know, maybe you can tell me how these statistics are actually compiled, because I'm not really certain. You know, do we know for certain? Can the OECD tell us precisely how many illegal immigrants are there in France right now? Is there some kind of metric that gives us that?
No, there isn't an exact figure, obviously, because the very fact that these people are not documented means that they can't really be easily counted. There are quite a few statistics which are floating around, some of which are quite old. So I would rather avoid those. But what you can say in this case is that you see in recent years, as there's some pressure coming to reduce migration, sometimes in response to a negative perception of migration, and probably not unrelated to the economic crisis and the unemployment increases in a number of countries, is that most countries don't have a lot of margin for cutting most of their migration. Most of the migration that comes into countries is family. In Europe, it's largely free movement. And those are forms of migration that can't really be controlled by the government. So you're left with only a few small areas, labor migration. And in France, historically, in recent years, most of the labor migrants have actually been students who have stayed on. So one main reason you may see some attention to these categories in countries where they're trying to reduce migration is that you're stuck really with a small part, which is perhaps the kind of migration that most countries do want the most. And yet, if your objective is to reduce migration, you can really only play with this very small segment.
And who's going to be the big winner in all of that? We've been told, for instance, that Canada, which one-third of it is French-speaking, could draw in a lot of students. It already is from places like Francophone Africa.
Huge.
Well, the number of students is rising in general. The number of international students in OECD countries has risen from about 2 million to about 2.7 million just in the last decade. So what you have seen is a big increase in all countries. And that's true in Asia, that's true in Europe, and that's true in North America. As I said before, this is a big industry in some countries. In other countries, it's less of an economic question. It's more of a question of international cooperation, aid, development aid, also increasing internationalization of the university, guaranteeing a sufficient enrollment. I don't think that you'll see so much a decline as you may see some more increases than you might have in other destinations which are easier to go to.
And what are those destinations?
Well, the main destinations for international students are usually the English-speaking countries, just because it's easier for people to go. They tend to be more open. But you've seen in recent years changes as well. So some of the countries that offer, let's say, tuition, no tuition, are attractive. In Scandinavia, the countries which don't charge tuition have been increasingly attractive. And of course, you have more and more Chinese who are going abroad to study, and they're really going everywhere.
Maybe one point which is said by people who wrote this directive is that they say that if we keep foreign students in France, there will be a brain drain. Do you think it's true, or it's just one of their points?
I think that you do need to pay some attention to that question. In the past, many students did come on the kind of scholarships where they were supposed to return to their home country. That's less and less the case. Okay. So certainly in a case where you've trained someone with the idea that they're going to go home, but on the other hand, it's very difficult to place limits on an individual liberty that way. If they find a job...
But what a wonderful political hand grenade they have with you. Because you see, you had a job here in France.
And I was a scholarship student in France.
That's right.
So
a job. So what French person are you taking that job away from? You see, that's what they're going to do here.
But this is their position. I was replacing an Irishman, and they couldn't find an EU national. I'm in an EU. I'm in an English-speaking job. Period. Which means they're not going to find a French person who's going to fill that job, and it will go unfilled until some other person who is Anglophone happens to come upon their doorstep. Given the fact that they were looking for months, that's going to be complicated.
That's going to be complicated. We're going to pick up on that point when we return. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.